The president is considering his next phase of coronavirus response legislation, and it really looks awesome, guys. Tax cuts and protections for businesses. According to the New York Times, the top two priorities for the upcoming rescue package include the suspension of payroll taxes and an expanded deduction for corporate spending on meals and entertainment.
So, Executive Director of American Compass Oren Cass, he speaks about the hazards of prioritizing this business bottom line over citizens necessarily. And he writes in his founding letter, the market works constantly to erode a nation's solidarity, and yet when the market fails the nation, it must have that solidarity to fall back on. Oren joins us now via Skype, and a full disclosure, I am one of the contributing writers to Oren's project, so that out of the way. Oren, I mean, this is something that you and I had discussed offline. How is it that we're living in the year 2020? Donald Trump runs on a message counter to GOP economic orthodoxy, and yet capital gains talk, it's as if this is the same priorities that they push during any sort of economic discussion. What's happening here, Oren?
Well, I think what we're seeing and have been seeing for a long time is the difference between campaigning and governing. That you can stand up yourself at a podium and take position A or position B, but if you're actually trying to develop legislation and advance an agenda, a lot of the work is going to be driven by the establishment, by the work that's already been done, by the beliefs of everybody 1, 2, and 3 layers down. And by and large, on the right of center, that for a long time has been focused on tax cuts. And the full playbook, you have to flip pretty far into it, maybe to the appendix before you get to something that's not tax cuts. And so I think we're seeing that both from the White House and frankly, we also saw it from the Senate, where all of the interesting ideas are coming from this very small group like Senator Hawley, Senator Rubio, Senator Romney, Senator Cotton, who are willing to think more in a more heterodox way. But the rest of the group, when we're facing this crisis, has yet to show an ability to really attack it creatively.
Yeah.
Could you speak to some of the specifics that are being floated right now? I mean, we mentioned payroll tax cut, this meals and entertainment deduction, also a capital gains tax cut, a potential infrastructure package. Apparently, that's the one thing that's really controversial within the administration, which to me seems insane. Also, this corporate liability shield has emerged as a big deal, both for Mitch McConnell and the administration. What do you think of each of those items?
You know, I think in isolation, there's a case to be made for a lot of them. I can't think of a case to be made for cutting the capital gains tax at the moment. I can't think of a case to be made for making expensing permanent, which is something that wouldn't make a difference for 3 or 4 years. Some of the others, if you think about a payroll tax cut, that's not a terrible idea. That's a way to get relatively more money into people's paychecks and make it more attractive for employers to hire them. The problem is that that's the whole list, that right. There isn't really a holistic view of, what is the scope of this challenge and how different and unique is it from even prior, economic crises, let alone public health crises. And so if you had a list of 5 kind of really aggressive measures being taken to kind of either do things that you thought could get the economy going again, or else support it in its semi-freeze to help people who aren't able to work right now. And if number 4 on your list were a payroll tax cut, that could be a perfectly reasonable agenda. The problem is, as you guys have gone through the list, it is a mix of tax cuts that might be useful and tax cuts that don't seem like they could be useful at all.
Right. And so, Oren, let's talk about that in particular. What do we need to see done? As you say, it's not necessarily the list. It's the fact that that's the only thing that's on the list. What are some of the ideas that your project would like to advance in a moment in a crisis like this?
Well, I think there are some short-term ones and some long-term ones. And the short-term ones should be the initial focus here, because the problems are happening right now. And so things that would be better down the road don't solve that. I think there are some really good ideas. There are some existing programs that need to be made bigger. So we've seen this PPP program that actually is getting money to the small businesses that need to just stay afloat, has been just beset by this refusal to even put enough money into it to make it function well. And then there are some really interesting proposals. One I particularly like from Senator Romney focuses on hazard pay.
Yeah.
And the idea that for the essential workers who we need to be working even during a shutdown, and then especially as we start to gradually open up, those folks should be compensated for the risk they're assuming, for the value they're providing on behalf of society. And you could say, well, grocery stores should just pay everybody $25 an hour, but of course the grocery store wouldn't survive that way. And so Senator Romney has put forward a proposal to basically subsidize the wages or provide bonuses to the workers who do get back to work, which I think is a great bridging mechanism.
Yeah.
So those are two things I would do in the short run.
Yeah, we covered that here, and I think it's an excellent idea. I hope it's something that's embraced. I'm not particularly hopeful, but I hope it's something that is embraced here. We're already hearing Mitch McConnell and John Thune and others sounding the alarm about the debt and the deficit, and you can kind of see where this is headed. And once we get through the worst of the crisis, then there'll be this massive push to cut spending. First of all, what is your view of deficit spending and taking on more debt right now in the midst of this crisis? And then what is an ethical way to get the budget back under control afterwards?
I think deficit spending during a crisis is entirely appropriate. The money you spend, and even if you have to borrow it, can be well worth spending, and certainly in this case, I think it is. I think the problem that we have is that for a long time now, we haven't balanced that with responsible fiscal behavior when things are going well. So we already at the peak of this business cycle a few months ago, we were already running close to $1 trillion deficit. And if we go back from the spending we have to do now to continuing to run permanent $1 trillion deficits, even when things are good, I think that's where you get into real trouble. So I do think it's reasonable to think in the long term about how do we manage that. Obviously, a lot of the emergency spending we're doing now could just go away itself. That's something that the left of center is going to have to grapple with. Every time we have a crisis, for instance, under Obama, we expanded all of these programs. And then in the boom, when people start to say, well, maybe food stamps should go back to what they were before the recession, that was attacked as somehow, anti-poor and disgraceful. And so I think we have to be willing to say, when the crisis is past, we all have to agree we're going to take away these things that we put in for the crisis. But then the right of center is also going to have to get more serious about recognizing that there's a lot of things we do want to pay for, and we're going to have to be willing to raise the money to pay for them.
Yeah, I think the problem, Oren, is that the focus is always on things like cutting food stamps versus maybe like rolling back some of the massive tax cuts that have overwhelmingly helped big corporations and the wealthiest among us. That as always ends up being permanent. And then it's the, anything that might benefit the working class that seems to be first on the chopping block.
Well, in the counter-cyclical sense, I don't think that's true. I think if you look at kind of the major moves that the Obama administration took during the recession, for instance, they were overwhelmingly in terms of expanding support. And that can be perfectly appropriate, or to the extent they were things like tax cuts and business benefits, they did tend to be temporary and automatically go away. So I do think we need to have a willingness to say we expand the safety net during crises, but that also means we have to be willing to contract it during good times. But then separately, I think you raise a perfectly fair point that independent of the business cycle, there has been a trend toward trying to pursue economic policy that is just tax cuts that generally benefit higher income households and pro-business measures that in practice seem mostly to be generating profits. And that's not are we in a boom or a recession question? That's what is our economic policy? What are our priorities? And if that strategy hasn't been doing what was promised, then it's time to rethink that strategy as well.
Yeah, and Oren, one of I think the more interesting things about this entire project is, there's always a discussion around branding. And one of the things that you've been very careful of is to say, no, we're economic conservatives. That's how you've defined your project, kind of reclaiming what conservatism means from a more economically libertarian, free market fundamentalist set. Just explain that to some of the viewers who might be confused.
Sure. I think when you look at the way we talk about economic policy in this country, we sort of assume we have a left of center that we'd call liberal or progressive, and they tend to be for more spending and bigger government programs. And then the right of center that we call conservative is actually libertarians who are mostly just for less government, less spending, trusting that whatever the free market does will deliver the best outcome. And I think markets are terrific. I think we should have limited government, but conservatism is a lot more than that. Conservatism is also concern for the stability of our institutions and our communities and the strength of our families and the strength of our social fabric. And those aren't things that the market pays any attention to. So I think we would be much better off. And what we're trying to do at American Compass is say, libertarians make some good points, and there are times when those arguments are important. But the core of what the right of center should be pushing isn't just a playbook that is tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts. It should be a much more holistic view of how do we create the conditions for an economy that is going to serve the whole nation. And that's what America did historically, and it paid huge dividends.
Yeah, certainly did. Thank you.
Congratulations on the launch, Oren. Always great to have you.
Thanks, Oren.
Thanks, Dad. Great to see you, too.
Next on Rising, a new video from the Trump campaign is bringing up Biden's relationship with the truth. That when Rising continues.